Wegtat, Tanayap, Tanse, Aning Buju, Aloha. My name is Emily Dundas Oke. I'm the assistant curator at the Burnaby Art Gallery. And it's an honor to be here on the unceded and unsurrendered lands of the Kamloops people. Coach Dem, Deanna, Elsie, Kaden, for the opening, and thank you, Margaret, for the introduction. It's truly an honor to exhibit these works, which are part of a traveling and also a growing exhibition that was originally shown on the unceded territories of Hunkaminam and Squamish-speaking peoples. It's important for myself to introduce myself in the language of the artists exhibiting, because much of the exhibition is actually about communication, and in some instances also the failure of language, particularly the failure of newer languages, such as the one I'm speaking to you now. The title, Echoes, is a refracted title of the exhibition text. Your big words are echoes of what our bodies hold. In bringing these works together, I was thinking through how an echo always requires a body, a material body, a landscape body on which to resound. And an echo starts from this body, a femme body, an Indigenous body, an Ahiau, Métis, Scottish, and English body. What I always utter is always connected to the land, to a specific place, and requires another place, another body to bounce off of, and how an echo may allow something to be shared, might go quiet. An echo might reemerge and resurge once again. This exhibition, which was originally shown in 2019, always considered the communities of urban Indigenous folk, how we hold space for one another, and how, despite movement and great geographies, we remain connected and communicate through waterways and other materials. It grew out of conversations that took place in these territories in Shekwet-Makulu, with Indigenous scholars, artists, and elders in research circles and by the rivers. As Sigumdas Putlas, Dr. Elder Margaret Vickers share, water connects us all. The exhibition is about inherent knowledge in both old and new ways of being within the landscape and medicines and materials, and how these ways of connecting can provide solace and comfort despite our isolation and the destruction that we face. It's been a real deep honor to be trusted to exhibit these works, and also a great sadness that as this iteration of the exhibition was coming into being, Jeffrey McNeill Seymour became an ancestor. As you all know, Jeffrey McNeill Seymour was a proud member of Kamloops Shekwepem, and also a fourth-generation English settler. He was a two-spirit artist, advocate, and social worker. He was a member of the Traditional Family Governance Council for the Kamloops Shekwepem Nation, as well as a speaker for the nation. He regularly contributed to the international two-spirit community through writing, art, and most recently provided expert witness testimony in Iqaluit, Nunavut for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in the inquiry of Canada. He believed and he knew that without healthy land, water, and air, we don't have people. He believed that absolutely, not only does social work have to incorporate land and water defense into its practice, but so should every human in this place called Canada, and nurture what stewardship means in this age of reconciliation. It's with deep sadness that I acknowledge Jeffrey's passing, but with deep, deep gratitude that he shared with us in his lifetime. He had a very clear vision of Indigenous resurgence, of two-spirit caretaking, and surthrivance. He carried a deep love, which he urged us all to use and to carry and underscore everything we may do. It's with immense gratitude that I show his work, which was created in collaboration with Métis, Saulteaux, and Polish two-spirit artist Dana Danger, and supported through family and community who supported the ceremony and performance, the videography, and the writing surrounding the project. Jeffrey and I were able to produce an eloquent publication in 2019, which includes the beautiful essay he co-wrote with Bonnie Clone, who is here as well. This exhibition is dedicated to the memory of Jeffrey McNeill Seymour and his continued call to actions to which we can respond. I'd like to extend as well a deep thanks to all contributing artists, Jazz Whitford and their collaborator Solomon Chinekwe, Nicole Preisel, Carolyn Monet, Makai Tubbs, and Scott Benison Abandan. Thank you as well to Jennifer Kane at the Burnaby Art Gallery for their first invitation to create this exhibition and producing the publication, as well as writers Jay Simpson, Valine Jules, and Bonnie Clone, Kukshdam, to each of the installation assistants who worked tirelessly to bring it to life, as well as the entire staff at the Kamloops Art Gallery. As I mentioned, this exhibition had been informed by conversations and dialogues that took place here in Secwepemcúlecw and also on the coast. In looking for guidance on how to live ethically in a time of isolation, fragmentation, amidst deep climate catastrophe and ongoing colonial violence, it was through the generosity of these artists and practices that I learned that the landscapes and waterways have always had the answer. Jeffrey McNeill Seymour and Dana Danger's Two-Spirit Man, Two-Spirit Women showcases a ceremony performed at sunrise at the confluence of the rivers in this place that Jeffrey would call home. At the Wild Salmon Caravan of 2017, an elder, an Untul elder, had seen Jeffrey and witnessed how well he carried himself and bestowed onto him a gift and a responsibility, uttering to him, "You carried us through a difficult topping. You spoke truth to power with love and laughter. I'm going to tell you something you now must do." Following her directive and supported by extended kin, Jeffrey offered a sacred bundle of salmon bones and cedar and his braid to the salmon, the water, and the water spirits. This ceremony acts as wayfinding, as it was taught that it was through the cedar, through the salmon bones, that the salmon would find their way home. That was their wayfinding. That's how they knew how to come to this point in the river. This performance and ceremony comes at a time when Two-Spirit youth are at most risk of genocide, and when we have lost more than 60% of our keynote species within these territories. If you knew Jeffrey, you knew that he was loving, but he was also willing to take a risk. Ceremony, typically, it's forbidden to be recorded, and he knew that there was urgency in this ceremony. He knew that there's urgency to caretaking for our Two-Spirit youth and our salmon, or other than human kin. So he recorded the ceremony, and as you can see, he's asked us to witness it. He's calling us in to witness, to create space and acknowledge that our Two-Spirit youth always have roles, they always have responsibilities, and that they are loved. He's giving us a way forward to how to take care of the rivers that also take care of our youth. We see in the film two-spirit people undertaking their responsibilities to call the salmon home as the sacred bundles offer wayfinding. We see how loved Jeffrey and Dana are, and just a mere glimpse into the infinitely vast community that have been shaped by their vision. Jeffrey and Dana's installation is through this door here. It's a looping installation, and I encourage you to spend a good amount of time with it when you have the opportunity, and to hear the voices and the waterways that support them and support us. The waterways and salmon that connect, that are offered in the performance to the river, are connected as well to Nicole Preisel's practice. So Nicole Preisel is here, and I'm so glad she is. She's a Stalo and Squamish exploratory designer and artist, currently based on the unceded territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Her installation is over to my right, and it's the beautiful cedar installation. So Nicole Preisel's practice is organized predominantly around plants and storytelling and knowledge sharing. So in their practice, they bring people together, under certain contexts to share the knowledge of their territories, to share what we can learn about the history of the mountains, the legends, the true history that is really a part of the landscape that surrounds us on the coast. And in these knowledge sharings, Nicole also shares practical knowledge. How do you make rope? How do you make cedar rope? If anybody has worked with it, they know it's an infinitely strong material that Nicole's ancestors use and folks still today use to hunt. And in the sharing of knowledge of the medicine of cedar and the practice, that sharing becomes embedded within the ropes themselves. Across this exhibition is this kind of a negotiation of what is shared, what is not shared. As I mentioned, Jeffrey shared the ceremony knowing it was urgent to do so. In Nicole's work, some of those stories might not be visible to you. They're part of the rope themselves, and this is an ongoing negotiation that, particularly as Indigenous people, we know we have to be careful with what we share given what's already been taken. So the cedar here is also medicine, and it connects to these waterways. This is an iterative installation, meaning it changes each time. And here, Nicole was thinking about how these waterways of Kamloops connect with the Stalo, so the the river that you may know as the Fraser is known as the Stallow, and how this waterway has always been a conduit for knowledge. There's always been transit. Nicole's ancestors would have come up this waterway to trade cedar with Jeffrey's ancestors here, and it's always been a place for people to meet and share knowledge. It's been really beautiful, and I hope you have a chance this evening to speak with Nicole, because in these workshops that are open to everybody, folks from their own backgrounds globally come forward and share, rope and its significance to their people. You'll notice too, when you have a chance to walk down this corridor, that Nicole's work then carries you on to some of Jazz Whitford's work. So Jazz Whitford is a Secwepemc and mixed settler artist. So from these territories going between the coast and here now, in their practice, they have a mixed media practice, and they're also a poet. So it's an honor to have their work, their words in the publication, and their paintings and photography here. You'll notice that in their work, they have quite a minimalist abstract gesture and quite a bit of nostalgia imbued in their work, thinking of a landscape that they might be away from as they live on the coast, this landscape, which will hopefully be familiar to you. They're thinking through just how little information you might need in a single mark on canvas to capture the entirety of the history of this landscape. Importantly, too, they're aware of the institutional aspects of colonialism, namely the church across in the Kamloops Secwepemc Reserve and the residential school as well. At the end of the corridor, you'll see two long pieces in which Jazz has gone over with their paint and their strokes to obscure archival images of this colonial architecture. And also these works are looking to find a home for an intergenerational or a residential school survivor or a community group. So if you know of anybody who might find comfort in having these works, their contact information is there. Jazz is also thinking through as well spiritual well-being and what places are still open to our youth. You'll notice some works dealing with Budweiser, titled Bud Village. So thinking through how now spiritual places might not be open to those who use substances, including alcohol and drugs, but how with a harm reductionist approach and open arms, we can help people meet them where they're at, to avoid a dual displacement. In refusing to offer people support, they might experience a dual displacement from home due to colonialism and displacement from spirit if sacred spaces aren't made open to them. The work echoes further with the introduction of Solomon Chinekwe as a photographer. Along the corridor here, you'll see a beautiful diptych series, which includes portraits of elders and community members alongside their ancestral territories. So feelings of longing and nostalgia continue to imbue their works as folks might not have access to their homelands anymore. I'm very honored to include many works by Carolyn Monet. So as you enter the gallery, there's a large video work. You may hear it. We're a big group, so I'll just introduce them briefly, and then I hope you'll have plenty of time to visit. Carolyn Monet's work extends into this large vinyl here, as well as all the things adorned on the walls, the copper and the black horizon photographs. Carolyn Monet is an Algonquin and French artist who grew up between Brittany, France, and Oite, Quebec. So she's Algonquin and first generation here to Canada, and she thinks often of the categories kind of imposed on her, both as a person who's Indigenous and non-Indigenous, an artist who might be seen as emerging or professional, and she finds kind of some fun in troubling these categories. So in the film, you'll notice there's two screens, and it tracks her voyage. She decided to take the voyage very similar to what her French ancestors would have done, traveling from near Amsterdam all the way across the Atlantic Ocean for 22 days on a cargo ship up the St. Lawrence River into Montreal. So in this, she's thinking of this middle ground as someone who occupies a dual position as Indigenous and non-Indigenous, thinking of the middle ground of where her ancestors would have met, and that would have been the Atlantic Ocean. In the film, you'll notice it's quite moody, it's quite tense, and you can imagine being the only woman on a cargo ship for 22 days and just how tense and fearful that might have been. You'll notice as well, things come and go, the dual screen approach, allowing things to grow, but also to disappear. Thinking about what the ocean has absorbed, what it has become home to, what it has witnessed through this history of contact, spiritual contact, imperialism, continued trade, and now a spite where most of our communication wires actually call home. So she's thinking through what has this place been witnessed to, and also what mood of its own does it have. You'll notice as well that both the large video works in this space, Carolyn Monet's and Jeffrey McNeill Seymour's videos, make use of dual approach. Jeffrey McNeill Seymour's videos is recorded from multiple perspectives, and I think in doing so, he's asking us to ensure that many people witness this. And I think in Carolyn Monet's video, she's saying, what are these two sites? What's the middle ground, and where do things disappear? She's very much, loves to work with Anishinaabe aesthetics, but she's also pays homage to, her Western roots. And you'll notice as well in the video, waves blotter like Rorschach tests, thinking through how the waterways and other great psychological distances can become bridged through transit and through the water. Her work continues into this site, and on the vinyl wall is a large piece titled Bridging Distance. This piece states in Morse code, Bridging Distance, the title of the work itself. Morse code is also what you hear in her video, along with the radio jamming signals. I myself don't speak understand Morse code, and perhaps there's some here too, but we realize that perhaps we get more communication from the water itself rather than these newer technologies. In that far wall are 3 works titled Semaphores. So these works were also created on her journey of 22 days at sea. And they also recall a little bit of a tactic used in World War I and World War II. So you can imagine a large ship on a vast horizon during wartime is a pretty hard target to hide. So some naval officers undertook a strategy of painting ships actually in very bold, kind of confusing geometric shapes of black and white, such that the direction of the ship and speed of the ship was hard to decipher. So this is a way of becoming so hyper-visible that you're actually harder to track or harder to target. And I think of this again across this exhibition of, in some cases, being concealed or hiding is a strategy, and sometimes hypervisibility is a strategy as well. Throughout this work, you see as well there's a horizon line, and Caroline was particularly interested in capturing movement in a static image, wondering if it's possible to capture movement in an image. Of course, the history of photography is also a contentious one in relationship to Indigenous peoples. Currently now, too many Indigenous peoples' images are being appropriated without consent, the context not always shared, and historically, photography has been used to steal homelands. The early days prior to Canada's full dominion, photography was used of vast landscapes void of Indigenous peoples and as a way to sell land back home. Also, many archaeologists or folks with an interest in Indigenous people use photography under the assumption that one day we might disappear, that this might be the last chance to see an Indigenous person. So here, Carolyn Monet kind of takes up the technology of photography once again to think through how it might be utilized to actually share Indigenous strategies. Leanne Batasmo Sake Simpson, who's also an Indigenous artist and scholar, shares that Indigenous aesthetics can be coded to speak to multiple audiences. And I think again about the strategy in being concealed or camouflaged, but in plain view. Carolyn Monet's work extends further to the copper panels on this wall here. As I mentioned, copper is a special material. I myself can't afford it, but I would love to be adorned in it. And yet it's also the material that's one of the materials used when I plug my phone in at night. It's the material that's laid in across the ocean floor over 1 million kilometers, connecting these vast, again, geographies across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It's also a sacred material that's been used to share history, laws, family systems, and so it also has a dual identity as both a contemporary technological material in a tech sense, but also a history quite old and quite special to Anishinaabe peoples. This title of this piece is "The Future Itself Has a Future." So just as Caroline asks us to consider the ocean of having its own mood, its own decisions, its own memory, she's asking us to think that the future itself has an agency, the future itself has something to look forward to. I think also it's a beautiful kind of a beautiful representation of the messy in-between of being between two sites. This idea of kind of going forward and backward in time and mixing up the whole linearity of time is also a part of Makai Tab's practice. So Makai is a Hawaiian artist who grew up in Honolulu. His works include these wall works here and the two on the plinth. And being a Hawaiian artist, who grew up on his territories and his waterways, he was very much aware of the destruction that plastic and other waste are doing on our waterways, going to the beach and seeing just throughout the course of his lifetime how much change has happened. So he's left with us 2 sets of fossils. I should mention that he also lives in Brooklyn, New York now, which if you've spent time in New York, you'll also be aware that there's a lot of waste produced in that city. So this kind of idea of waste is following him everywhere. These works titled Written in Stone, are works that came out of being in New York. You'll notice that Makai has a really materially based practice. He's someone, like many artists, who just gets attached to a material for a reason you can't explain. I think many artists who you might know can't go to a thrift store with them because they're taking things home just because they feel good, they look good, and Makai is very much one of those people. He shared a story of walking into a dollar store one day and seeing an entire aisle just of disposable cutlery in every color you can imagine, and just being completely overjoyed, just being like in Disneyland for an artist, and walking out of there with bright greens and teals and pinks, and as soon as he steps out with these 2 bags of plastic, he says, "What am I doing? I know this is bad. This is the worst thing. This is what's killing all the waterways. This is what's killing my home." And kind of since that moment, he's committed to using only found or repurposed materials in his practice. And I think if you'd ask him, he said he's never short on materials. There's always enough to work with. So these works written in stone directly in front of me are works that he found while living in New York, going for nice long walks and seeing that in New York on this, what they would call a stoop, what some of us might call a porch. There's kind of a practice of leaving piles of books out for your neighbors. So kind of like a low barriers, little free library. So if you see a pile of books on someone's porch, you know it's free for the taking. Some of these books do find a home. Some people might take them home with them. Others might just get rained on, and who knows where they might end up. And Makai was really interested in this idea of kind of the multiple outcomes of books which have been kind of at the center of some knowledge systems for a long time. Books, reading, which oftentimes legitimizes what we know when it's written down in a record, and thinking they might just one day disappear. So he's created kind of a set of fossils, and each work itself is comprised of 2 books. So there's one which kind of retains its pages, it doesn't get torn up, and another book in which he's pulped it, and it becomes kind of the encasing of the other. So in this work, and across his practice, he's often thinking of new knowledge, how if I'm to create a new set of knowledges, does something have to be destroyed? And so when you have a chance to take a look at these works, you'll notice that just by chance, he's left parts visible, and by chance, many of them actually humanize the environment. So many of them are giving kind of human or emotive qualities to the land, which is completely serendipitous. And also, new meaning comes out when you obscure some knowledge. In the center of the gallery is a work titled Stepping Stones. And again, being witness to just the vast amount of plastic that's across his lands, Makai was very interested to hear that plastic is so pervasive in our landscapes and our waterways, that it's mixing so deeply and getting so embedded in rock that it's actually an entirely new geological body called plasticglomerate. So in 2014, a few geologists got together and investigating plastic as it's so embedded in rock through being in waterways and on mountainsides. It's ontologically inseparable, meaning it's no longer just plastic on a rock, it's a whole new rock, and it includes plastic components. So here Mackay has created what he kind of refers to as fossils, as a future now time. So thinking after we may no longer be here, after my texts disappear into the ether and my books wash ashore, what record do we leave? And it might be this geological record, one in which our relationship to plastic is the main marker of our time. He's also thinking about kind of the contradictory promises of plastic. We buy plastic things because it's disposable, but plastic is also one of the most permanent materials we know of. So it's both simple, complex, disposable, and permanent, and just playing around with that. Similarly to Nicole's practice, actually, when this work was first shown, it was about half these pieces. So Mackay as well will respond to waterways. He visits as a traveling artist and invite the community in with him to create new works. So similarly, some of these works were created as he was teaching and learning about the waterways he was visiting. Behind me is Mackay's final work, titled Erasure. As I mentioned, Mackay is a Hawaiian artist, and I had the great pleasure of hosting a panel talk with him, Nicole, Jeffrey, and Valine Jules, in which Mackay shared, as a Hawaiian artist, yeah, and similarly to Caroline, we often get asked, are you a contemporary artist? Are you a traditional artist? And kind of getting completely disappointed with that question, because he says, my ancestors would have always been contemporary. My ancestors, they were brilliant. They just had different materials at the time than I do now. They were always inventing new technologies, always inventing new practices and way of doing things to do so efficiently and ethically. Yeah, and so in this work, he's kind of recalling on just how smart and skilled his ancestors would have been. In Hawaii, there's a bird called the o'o bird, which is a black bird, but with just 2 to 4 very beautiful yellow feathers. And these feathers were so stunning that Hawaiians had an ethical, sustainable practices of harvesting the birds, taking 1 or 2 feathers from each and releasing the bird. And in doing so, they would build just the most gorgeous regalia, entire staffs and robes covered in these bright feathers. So Mackay, as I am, is astounded at just how good they must have been at trapping and releasing and capturing these birds so as to not harm the population of the birds in order to build this stunning regalia. Unfortunately, as settlers arrived to Hawaii, they also found these birds stunning and would hunt them for sport. So the population rapidly decreased with settlement to the islands, and in 1934, the last o'o bird was seen. Likely causes of extinction include hunting, deforestation, as well as mosquito-borne diseases. So this work here is comprised of 16 birds, each one made out of audio cassette tapes. So the casing becomes the branch, and it's the information part of a tape, the tape itself that is the bird and spools forward. And they're each connected to the earth or to the plinth by little magnets. Magnets being something that will completely erase the information on the tape itself. So I think Mackay is asking us to question what knowledge is lost as these species are also lost. In this final corridor is work by Scott Benisabanda. Scott is an Anishinaabe artist who's quite interested in making known and felt Anishinaabe ways of knowing and ways of being. Scott studied psychology, religion, and culture, and is quite interested in purporting that both hypnosis, dreaming, and intuition are Anishinaabe methods of knowing. So often these things might be associated with Western psychology or surrealism, but he's saying that they're a part of his culture, a part of his inheritance. This work, Blood Memories, Psychic Histories, comprises a number of prints and video recordings that are the result of residency both in Melbourne, Winnipeg, and Montreal. So in creating the work, Scott's really interested in just how every place is laden with memory, and how every place kind of becomes a holder for a collective consciousness or a collective memory. So he's also quite into technology and worked with programmers to scan specific places, and each time a new person would enter that place, that would become registered in kind of custom-built code. That code would then create an image, which would then prompt an audio, and using code, the audio itself would kind of have its own agency. It would then impact the image. So everything that happened in the space was recorded and has become, in a sense, a memory. But here for us, it's once again indecipherable and indistinguishable. And thinking through blood memory, Scott is thinking through how across generations, an infinite amount of generations, a single individual might retain that memory. So a way in which we are never fragmented. You know, the individual contains the whole and the infinite whole. You'll notice they're quite abstract works, and this, is contrast to perhaps like European Western art history, in which abstraction is about fragmenting. There's some schools of thought that try to isolate painting. To make an abstract painting is to say, what makes a painting separate from a sculpture? How can I isolate that? Is it surface? Is it color? Here, Scott is interested in saying that abstraction is actually about connecting it all, about the infinite interconnectedness. And as Indigenous peoples, we're familiar with other kind of modes of abstraction, namely the abstraction of value from land. So here, the land itself is a memory, and we are a part of that too, the land becoming encoded onto us, and us encoded into the land. So I'll end speaking of the last work. Jazz Whitford once again here to my left. So these are the two large panels, and I think these are really kind of symbolic of their practice, in which you can have a sense of the landscape through such a small gesture. Jazz too is thinking about how an individual plant, an individual space might encapsulate the whole. And so it's just really an honor to have this work included as this exhibition continues to grow. And I also encourage you, when you have the time, to allow this exhibition to grow further by engaging with our engagement space. So just here down to the corner, there's a space for you to echo back, to speak back to the waterways, speak back to these lands and these practices through poetry or drawing or as you'd wish. Yeah, it's been quite an honor and a privilege, and I want to thank each of you for coming and for witnessing. Thank the entire staff, including Margaret, Charo, Matthew, and Emily, who are here, as well as each of the installation assistants. There's so many, and their work is so deeply valued. And I also, I look forward to continuing to speak with each of you, and I look forward as well to continuing to honor Jeffrey McNeill Seymour's legacy through this exhibition, through the publication, but also beyond, and to ensure that his vision continues to underscore our work with love and criticality and Indigenous resurgence. So, Kukshnam, and thank you.